What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the College Sports Connection podcast, where Double A, Alex, and AJ host the Mid-American Conference best.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the College Sports Connection podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Captain. Joining me, as always, it's AJ the Guru.
What's going on, everybody?
AJ, welcome back. We had a great week 3 of college football. Couple surprising finishes here in the MAC from the past week. Couple games didn't go ways I think we wanted them to go. Couple went much better than we expected them to go. So let's dive into all the games we didn't attend, and we'll then recap the 2 that we did attend.
Yeah, let's do it.
So starting with...
Start with Ball State. They got a big win.
That works for me.
Cool. Yeah, Ball State. Ball State won 31-0 against Murray State. Which a great game in Muncie. It was family weekend, so I saw a lot of pictures from the tailgate and from inside the stadium. It looked like a great crowd, which was great to see for Muncie. As I mentioned, they won 31-0 against the Racers.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of look at the stats here. Paddock was 27-44 for 227, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. Carson Steele had a great day on the ground. 25 carries is a lot, especially with the backfield that they have. But he had 25 carries, 141 yards rushing, averaged 5.6 on the ground, 1 touchdown. His longest was 23. Rushing on the ball game, though, with the other 7 guys who ran it here, 6 guys, 249 on the ground. Jayshon Jackson led receivers with 6 receptions. 6 receptions for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. As I mentioned, he led receivers for 227 yards on the day. So overall, great win for Ball State. They needed it. They needed a win going into that game 0-2.
Yeah,
it was not ideal for the Cardinals, but now they have Georgia Southern this week, who they're familiar foes with. They've played a few times over the past few years. They played down in Georgia. I believe they played the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. The Mercedes Dome is what it's called now. But that'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a tough game for the Cardinals before they get into conference play the following week at home against Northern Illinois.
Yeah, so I'm excited for Ball State. I think, after a tough out-of-conference schedule right away, I mean, you travel to Tennessee down to Neyland Stadium, and that's a tough place to play. I don't care who you are. That's just one of those environments. It's really tough. And then you lose a close one in week 2, a conference game to Western Michigan, getting the bounce back here against Murray State, an FCS opponent, of course, but getting a bounce back kind of builds that confidence. Like you said, Paddock looked really good in that game. Ball State started really kind of slow in that game, only led 14-0 at halftime. They attacked on 17 more in the second half, but the defense, they came to play. They pitched a shutout, and Ball State ended up winning 31-0. Let's move out to Ames, Iowa, where the Ohio Bobcats traveled down to take on Iowa State. This one was all Iowa State early and often in the first half. Iowa State took a 30-3 lead into the locker room, and it just continued from there. Ohio finished with only just 10 points. Iowa State finished 43, and this one was tough, right? You're talking about Ohio and what they have to do to kind of bounce back. I mean, they had that great win over Florida Atlantic in week 1, and now they're 1-2 on this season. Curtis Rourke had a rough day, 194 yards, 1 score, 2 picks. Not what you want. None of his receivers had more than 55 yards on the day. They had a couple of fumbles. They actually had 4 fumbles, and they lost 2 of them in that game. So you just look at it, and it's just all Ohio did was just mistake after mistake after mistake. And that's tough. 4 turnovers to 1 for Iowa State. Third down, Ohio is 2 of 13. Just not what you want. Their average yards per rush, 1.1. You can't win many ball games doing that.
No, not at all. You look at, they only had 24 yards total rushing. Curtis Rourke, he had -7, and Parker Navarro had -30. on 2 carries.
Yeah.
So that really brings those numbers down. That's something that OU really is going to have to establish here going on, especially in the conference play. Which they play Fordham this week, then they start conference play, but they're really going to have to establish a run game.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of they're going to need some consistency somewhere. And throwing the ball, Curtis, he can throw the ball. He's fine. He's a good passer. He's a good quarterback. Just playing at Iowa State's tough. But as we get into conference here, 194 yards through the air, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, a QBR of 23.1 is not going to cut it down the long stretch in the conference. He's really going to have to. They're really going to have to establish a run game to offset the pass game.
Well, I think Ohio finally, you get out of the tough part of your out of conference schedule. You have back-to-back weeks against Penn State and Iowa State, both 2 solid FBS programs from Power 5 conferences. Iowa State has now 3-0, which is a big step forward for them. The former Toledo head coach Matt Campbell coaching those guys to victory over Ohio. Big win for Iowa State. Ohio gets a chance to kind of retool with Fordham, like you said, here at home at Peden Stadium before moving into conference play. Moving to Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Bucknell comes into town, and they take on the Chippewas of Central Michigan, or the Fighting Jim McElwains, as you like to say. This one was interesting going into halftime. Central Michigan was only up 7-0, and then they just blew the doors wide open in the second half, ripped off 34 unanswered points to win 41-0. Lou Nichols was 30 carries for 166 yards and 2 scores. I mean, I was impressed with Lou Nichols.
Absolutely. This is a game too. You and I were together. We looked at the score, and we looked at each other like, really?
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, Daniel Richardson on the day, 15 of 32 for $198, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Lou Nichols, 30 carries, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns. His longest was 31. On the day, though, the team had 287 yards rushing, averaging 6.4 on the ground. And as I mentioned, Richardson through the air, or the team through the air, 242, averaging 7.3, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. This is a team who we were really high on going into the preseason, especially the combination of Lou Nichols and Daniel Richardson, seeing what they did last year as a team. And, starting off this year is tough. They had a very good game at Oklahoma State where they won previously. South Alabama was a surprise to everybody.
Yeah.
That was a game that they should not have lost. And Bucknell's kind of, a makeup game, if you will. They were able to put some points on the board. We were able to see what Lou Nichols does, what Richardson can do. But now they travel to Penn State here at Happy Valley this week, and before they get into conference play at Toledo, the game will be at here next weekend. But yeah, this is a tough grind for Central Michigan to get to conference play. This week, though, I think the biggest goal for Central Michigan should be just getting everybody out of that game healthy.
Well, and I think that's the key, right? Is you want to just get through this game healthy. I think, and maybe this is our overinflated confidence on teams from the Mid-American Conference, I think Central Michigan gives Penn State a much better game than Ohio did. Not that Ohio went into Penn State and played poorly, but obviously it wasn't the upset that they had back in 2012. So I think that Central Michigan, they have an opportunity to go in. This is a good final test before you really get into conference play, before the games really start to matter for the team. I mean, looking at some of these stats here, right? They were just over 50% passing, 7.3 yards per pass, which is great. You'll take that every game. The stat that blows my mind, 287 rushing yards to 21. Bucknell had 30 rush attempts, averaged 0.7 yards a carry, whereas Central Michigan had 45 rush attempts at 6.4 yards a carry. Turnovers were an issue in this game as well for Central. 2 turnovers, a fumble, and a pick. Bucknell obviously had their issues with turnovers as well, doing the same, a fumble and a pick. Central, the team who was supposed to, got the win, walked out of Kelly Shorts with the W. And that's all you could really, really hope for. Moving on to Neyland Stadium, a stadium we visited previously with Ball State. The Akron Zips taking on the home team, the Tennessee Volunteers. And this one, this was what you expected. It was 63-6 was the final score. Akron didn't score until the second half. Akron actually had a missed field goal in the first half, but they did finish 63-6. And I don't want to say if there's things you can hang your hat on, that's a good thing. But I think if you can hang your hat on anything, DJ Irons, 32 of 44 for 241 yards, no picks. Tennessee is a good team. I mean, I remember the very first game of the year against Ball State, very first play, a pick six.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's, they just looked. Akron needs to figure out a way to convert those passing yards into points, because a 240-yard passing day, that's not bad. I'll take that out of any quarterback.
Not at all. He completed 30, or he was 32-44. And somebody who else was interesting here on this game too was Shockey Joaquin Lewis. He was 9 receptions for 103 yards, averaged 11.4, no touchdowns, but his longest was 22.
Yep.
It seems like a consistent connection between those two, and that's going to be huge going into the conference play, because they do play Liberty this week, and they go, which I think Liberty's minus 26.5, which is kind of a surprise. I mean, Liberty is usually pretty consistent with Hugh Freeze before they go into back home for BG to start conference play. So Akron does have a lot of work to do, but I think there's going to be some consistency in the quarterback. I think that's a huge step. He played decent at Tennessee. If he can take that into the following week, this week against Liberty and into the conference, I think he'll be able to carry Akron to a few wins.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously, again, you take care of business against Liberty, even if you don't win. If you establish something consistent, that's going to be the key, especially as you prepare for Bowling Green, a team Akron has beat the last 2 seasons. So it'll be really interesting to see. I'm excited to see what DJ Irons does here against Liberty. That's going to be a fun one. I'm excited to see how that one goes, and I think it'll be closer than what people expect. We shall see. It's going to be exciting to see what Liberty and Akron can do with each other. And moving on to, let's dive into Kent State Long Island. Nothing really here. Kent State Long Island tied after the first quarter. Kent State all over them, 28-3 in the second quarter, and then 28 unanswered points in the second half. Toledo played Long Island earlier this year, beat them 37-0. We kind of expected Kent State was going to just absolutely throttle them, and that they did after a brutal loss against Oklahoma and against Washington. This is a good way to build your confidence, to show your guys you still believe in them, right as they prepare to go where? Down south to Georgia.
Yeah, that's a tough stretch for Kent State. I think they have to have the toughest non-conference schedule in the country.
Yeah, but I think it was one of the top 3 when I looked at the rankings.
Yeah, you look at the stats, and that Colin Sheely was 10 of 12 for $199, averaging 6.6, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. A great day for him. Rushing wise, Marquez Cooper on the day had 18 carries for 89 yards, 2 touchdowns, and receiving wise, Dante Cephas. You feel like he's been in the program a long time.
Right.
4 receptions, 75 yards, 1 touchdown on the day. Receiving wise, 203 yards total. Rushing, though, is where they really attacked. 353 yards on the ground amongst 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different guys.
Yeah.
So it's a great job from Coach Lewis to keep fresh legs in there, get new guys the ball. And, some guys who may not play the rest of this year, get them some game experience, some much needed game experience, and to get that first win on the year.
Well, you mentioned Dante Cephas, right? A guy who's been with the program for as long as he has. He's only a junior. So he's still got 1 more year in the program after this season. Obviously, all the players got a COVID year last year due to the pandemic from the year prior. So it's interesting. Dante Cephas is going to really do some really good stuff for the rest of his career. I think that he and Devontae Walker are 2 great targets for Colin Schlee to have, and they both proved it thus far. These are guys who are tough. They come out, they play hard, and I mean, they both have had some spectacular catches against both Oklahoma and Washington. It'll be interesting to see just how they perform against the defending national champions in Georgia. I'm not expecting a Kent State W, but How sweet would it be to see the MAC knock off the defending national champions on the road? That would be absolutely insane.
That would be huge, yeah.
So moving on to Buffalo, Coastal Carolina. This one was interesting. Alex McNulty went 4 of 4 on field goals and connected on both of his extra point attempts. He had went 3 of 3. No, 4 of 4. Sorry. I can get my stats right. 4 of 4 connected on both of his extra points. He had 14 points for Buffalo. So he accounted for more than half of their points. Buffalo had a really good shot at winning this game, and we were listening to this a little bit in the car. Buffalo took the lead late, and then all of a sudden Coastal Carolina came storming back, had 21 points scored in the fourth quarter, ends up taking this win away from Buffalo 38-26. And we hear it a lot, right? There's talk of Maurice Linguist not being the coach everybody thinks he is, and everybody wants him to be. Coastal Carolina is a good G5 program. I don't want to take that away from them. They have built themselves up very well from being an FCS program into being a G5. So I want to give them the credit that they're due. Last year, they were ranked in this game when they played Buffalo at Buffalo. I think they were ranked like 15th in the country. And so, I don't want to take anything away from them. Grayson McCall is still their signal caller. He lit up Buffalo for 251 and 3 touchdowns. Cole Snyder for Buffalo, 29 of 48, 264, 2 scores. What hurt him the most? Those 2 interceptions. And that right there is what's going to hurt you when you're trying to win a football game. What I did think was interesting, and I'm looking at stats here. Both teams had 4 turnovers apiece. All of Coastal Carolina's came off of fumbles. It's not what you want. Looking deeper at stats, Buffalo was 8 of 20 on third down, whereas Coastal Carolina was 3 of 8. Much better efficiency on that third down. I don't think Buffalo has much to worry about yet. I think this was, even though this was a loss, responding from the wacky Hail Mary play that Holy Cross beat them on last week. I think that there's an opportunity to bounce back here. Mike Washington paced the running backs for 15 carries, 59 yards. Ron Cook, 13 carries for 42 yards. Cole Schneider did the team no favors for 12 rushes for negative 26 yards. And again, those are sacks, right?
Sure. The one thing that was kind of interesting to me was, he threw the ball 48 times and only had 264 yards throwing. Now you think about it, you throw the ball 45, 50 times, you're going to be in that 300 range
easily.
At least. And that just was not the case. Those two interceptions really did hurt. That brought his QBR to 17.5 on the day.
Yeah.
But receiving wise, 278 yards compared over 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 guys he threw it to. Justin Marshall kind of led receivers with 8 receptions, 88 yards, 1 touchdown, along with Quan Williams, 8 receptions, 62 yards, and a touchdown. Buffalo's got some work to do. They have Eastern Michigan this weekend, who we're going to talk about next, who had a huge Power 5 victory. And Eastern looks really good right now. So we'll get into it a little bit.
Eastern, man.
And Eastern's only favorite, and it's only Eastern minus 7 or 6 points right now. So that's really interesting to see here, just a few days away from the game. But nevertheless, Buffalo has a lot of work to do.
Buffalo has a lot of work to do, but let's talk about that Eastern game real quick.
Yep.
Pac-12 after dark is what we lovingly refer to it as out here on the east side of the country, because that game starts at 11 o'clock instead of our traditional 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock prime time. So Eastern Michigan goes out west and stuns Herm Edwards and Arizona State at home, punches them in the mouth early, scores 10 in the first quarter, 14 in the second quarter, kicks a couple field goals in the third and fourth quarter, held Arizona State to just 3 touchdowns, final score 30-21. And this was a game that everybody is talking about. Samson Evans, and this is the thing that comes away from this. Samson Evans had not rushed for more than 100 yards a game in his entire career at Eastern Michigan. he had 36 carries for 258 yards. He had one score, just one score, but he ran wild.
He did. He had to. I mean, you look at the passing. Uh, Taylor Powell on the day was only 10 of 14 for 93 yards, one touchdown. But yeah, Evans, he's one of those guys who you heard a little bit about going into the preseason. But the senior from Crystal Lake, Illinois, 36. Yeah, you mentioned it. 36 carries, 258 yards on the ground, one touchdown. His longest was 32, averaged 7.2 on the ground.
He was a bulldozer.
He's a dude, yeah, and it's great for Eastern. Huge win for Coach Creighton. We've talked to him and become big fans of his over the last couple of months, having spoken to him, and he was very high on this team. And you see something. You kind of look down here, and Hassan Boudon wasn't really much of a factor in this one. Kind of surprising. He only had one reception for 6 yards. I don't know if he was hurt. We didn't get to watch the game. We were driving home.
No, we were in bed when that game was finishing up.
I was still driving.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you were still driving.
Yes.
I was in bed when that game was finishing up. I was trying to stay up and watch it, and I was out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Hassan Badone. Like, they only had 10 catches on the day from Taylor Powell. They had 4 from Austin Smith, and I think this is the question mark for Eastern Michigan is their passing game. It's clear the run game is figured out, and I think Taylor Powell will be fine for Eastern. I'm not too concerned about him. I think that anytime you go out and you play a Power 5 opponent, the thing that's going to carry you is going to be your rushing. I mean, depending on what kind of game it is, you're going to get the opportunity to throw a little bit more. But in a game like this, you stick with what's working, and that's why they went with Samson Evans. Just, hey, here's the ball. You're averaging over 7 yards a carry. Just keep running, man. Run wild. We'll figure out the rest. Don't you worry about it. And run wild he did. So hats off to Eastern. Like you said, Buffalo, Eastern coming up. We'll talk about that here shortly. Moving on to homecoming at Bowling Green. They amazingly, second overtime game in 2 weeks. This time it was far more in favor of the home team Falcons. Bowling Green finishes the upset, and I would say this might be the upset of the weekend. Defeats Marshall at home 34-31. It's their first homecoming victory since, I believe, 2015 for the Falcons. A week ago, everybody was talking about the 7 overtime game with Eastern Kentucky and how hot Scott Loeffler's seat was. This might have bought him a little bit more time.
It may have. Marshall's coming off that huge win at Notre Dame, so a lot of people had took Marshall, including myself, into this game, having coming off that high. But yeah, I mean, Matt McDonald looked good. He looked 27 of 45, 282 through the air, averaged 6.3 with 4 touchdowns, and the big one for him is no interceptions. I think that was a massive stat here. That really helped kind of, I think, BG win that game. Yeah. But, Pessan Wimberley here, 5 carries, 35 yards. They didn't do a whole lot of the ground. They only had 77 yards rushing, but through the air, just at the 300 mark. Duhilaire led the receiving, 4 receptions, 79 yards. He averaged 19.8 with 2 touchdowns. His longest was 27. Keith also had 8 receptions for 62 yards, averaged 7.8, 1 tutty. Longest was 21. Great win for BG. They coming up, they go down to Starksville from Mississippi State this week.
Yep.
That's going to be a tough one, but Mississippi State is 2-1 in that game, and they're favored by 30 points before they go into conference play against Akron the following week on the 1st.
Yeah, so I mean, again, this is a big one for Bowling Green. Hats off to them. I know BG Football Talk is probably listening to this right now, and we have no problem recognizing the accomplishments of what BG did in this game. Obviously, a big win over Marshall, who had previously upset the number 8 team in the country. So massive win for them. Now BG has to continue that momentum, and this is where Scott Loeffler and the Falcons have struggled in his tenure. You get a big victory, and then you fall flat. His first year, they played Toledo, beat Toledo, upset Toledo, who was heavily favored. And then they fell flat. They went 3-9 that year, I believe. Last year, they upset Minnesota. They went 4-8 last year. This year, you upset Marshall, who just upset the number 8 team in the country. While you're sitting at 1-2, let's see how it plays out. If Scott Loeffler can somehow get this team to rally and continue this momentum, we may see Scott Loeffler on the Bowling Green sidelines in 2023. There's a lot of talk about how hot that seat is. He's been there 4 years now. Everybody talks about don't count the COVID year. It doesn't matter. Football was still played. Games were still coached. Players were still coached. BG did not perform. I believe they went 0-6 that year. So maybe 1-5, whatever it was, they didn't perform. So now you have to look at it and say, all right, moving forward, what do we do? If they can get this team to stay focused and stay on target, BG could be in for a pretty decent season. I could see them finishing a 5-7, 6-6.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to Detroit. I really don't. Right now they're looking at facing their third loss against Mississippi State, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they would need to go 5-3 in conference play just to get to 6-6.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough task.
Yeah,
not impossible. Tough task.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So moving on to Northern Illinois Vanderbilt. Let's talk about that one really quick. I thought Northern Illinois had this thing.
I did too. I really thought this was a game they were going to be able to pull off. I was only losing by 10 at home, which is kind of a surprise. You kind of look at it here. Rocky Lombardi did get hurt. He was 7-7 for 79 yards with 1 touchdown, no interceptions. But while he was hurt, Ethan Hampton had to come in, performed pretty well. 12 of 19 for $124 with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception.
Yep.
On the ground for the Huskies. Antro Brown, he had 8 carries for 60 yards. He moved down to the receiving core here. Cole Tucker, who we were both high on early on in the year. We talked to Coach Lester at camp. Cole Tucker was 4 receptions, 88 yards, and averaging 22 yards with 2 touchdowns, and his longest was 70.
I want to point one thing out before we continue on this. Northern Illinois had a 2-score lead in the third quarter. Rocky Lombardi went out in the second quarter. You look at his passing stats. Obviously, we talked about Ethan Hampton here, 12 of 19, stepping into a really tough position, right? $124, 2 scores, 1 pick. Rocky Lombardi was 7 of 7 for 79 yards and 1 touchdown. He was perfect on the day until he got hurt. So, Rocky doesn't get knocked out. I think it's pretty fair to say Northern Illinois wins this game because Rocky's a gamer. We talked to Normandy at the Ohio State game, and she talked about how he didn't come back out. And we all know just how tough Rocky Lombardi is. That is a kid who has played in the Big Ten. He has faced the Big Ten gauntlet of teams like Ohio State, teams like with a great Michigan defense. So he's faced all that. He's battled through that, and he's done well. Now to see him get taken out, hope that he's okay. I haven't seen any news on whether or not he'll be back this week, but so we are hoping that he's okay. But there's a world in which Northern Illinois absolutely runs away with this one when they're up 14 in the third quarter. They the defense allowed Vanderbilt to come back, but I'm gonna say part of it was offensive woes where they just couldn't get into any kind of rhythm with a new guy under center.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. You look at Northern Illinois' schedule here now. They go to Kentucky. That's going to be a tough one on the road. With Kentucky's favored by 26.5. I haven't seen any news on Rocky. I don't know if he's going to be healthy or what. But either way, this week has given Hampton an opportunity to take number 1 reps, which I'm sure he didn't have prior. Sure. So that'd be good for him. But either way, I think Coach Hammock will have the guys ready to go, no matter who's at quarterback.
Moving on to one of our last 3 games here. Pitt versus Western Michigan. Waldo Stadium was hopping. They had about 24,000 people there. Pitt just came in, struggled early. It was a 7-point game going into the fourth quarter. And then all of a sudden the wheels fell off
the wheels the wheels fell off hard. You look at the kind of overall numbers here. Pitt had a 417 yards total offense, while Western only had a $180. And only 50 yards on the ground compared to 238 through the air for Pitt. Yeah, this is one where I thought Western would play a little bit better. I saw their defense the week before against Ball State. The defense was really good at defending the run. It seemed like, I mean, with Ball State having Carson Steele, they were able to hold him to a fairly reasonable number by giving up 238 yards on the ground and only giving 50. I'm sure our friend Coach Lester cannot be happy about that.
No.
But they go on the road across the country this week to San Jose State, where they're very familiar with the MAC conference here the past couple of years, having played Ball State in the bowl game and stuff like that. I think Toledo plays them too, right?
They played Western last year at Western. Toledo plays San Diego.
San Diego, that's what it was. That is, yeah.
But so I mean, you look at Western. Jack Salopek was harassed in this game. 99 yards. He was 6 of 18, 3 interceptions. The Western Michigan defense played tough I'll say they played tough for all 4 quarters. But when the offense is tossing up interceptions, it's bad field position. It's hard to defend, 25 yards consistently, So I think they'll be fine. I think they'll bounce back. I mean, this next game against San Jose State is going to be a tough one. But again, we can talk about that here in a minute. We will move on to the first of our 2 games of the day. And we've traveled down to Cincinnati, Ohio, to watch the Miami Redhawks play host to the Cincinnati Bearcats. And what a first half that was. Miami comes out and takes the opening lead. They go up 10-7, and then they actually go up 17-7 at one point. Cincinnati closes out the first half 24-17, and we're thinking we got a ball game. Not so much without Brett Gabbert. I think that was a big portion of what this game is. But Mac Hippenhammer, your guy, he had a solid day. You look at his numbers. He had 4 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. And he had a touchdown. His touchdown made the highlight reel. That was a beautiful strike. And it was just, what a catch by him to just kind of fall down in the end zone with it. It was absolutely incredible. Avon Smith connected with him. And Avon Smith, for being a guy who hasn't really done first team reps before, sure, he went 9 of 21 for 116. He still had 2 touchdowns. Not bad and I believe he's a freshman. Yeah, he's a true freshman. So he stepped in and he played well. I
was really impressed. I was really impressed with him. Cincinnati was able to get a lot of pressure on him many points throughout the first half that we were there. And he had to scramble out of the pocket many times. So he did a great job of looking downfield and getting the ball down the field. Yep. The thing that really kind of hurt Miami there towards the end was the size of the receivers. They did a great job of being able to go over the Miami defensive backs. And we saw that touchdown to end the first half was right where where Faith and I were sitting, right in the corner of the end zone. So you were able to watch, a 6'1" receiver jump over a 5'10" defensive back and bring it down.
Yeah.
I think kind of towards the end, at the beginning of that first half there, Miami was banking on the turnovers. They had two turnovers that they converted into points.
Big turnovers, yeah.
2 big turnovers on the plus side of the 50, and that didn't happen in the second half. But I think going on in that game, it just really Cincinnati just really wore down Miami. You look, Mac Hippenhammer had a great day.
I love that kid.
Yeah,
he's probably my new favorite receiver in the MAC. Mac Hippenhammer. What a great name too. Right?
It is. Fort Wayne kid. And so I love it. I played golf with his dad a few times.
Right.
And but yeah, you look at him, you look at on the ground, you look at Kevin Davis. He had 7 receptions for 30 yards. His longest was 11. He was able to break through a few times, but a couple penalties brought some things back, a couple missed assignments. But I think they go into Northwestern this weekend at Ryan Field, and I think this is a game they can actually win.
Because if they win that game, they will extend the Mid-American Conference streak of beating a Big Ten opponent to 15 straight years, minus the COVID year because they didn't play. So if Miami can go into Ryan Field and win that game, that is huge for the conference. That's great for the Mid-American Conference. That's obviously great for Miami. You bounce back from a loss to Cincinnati, who was in the playoffs last year. And frankly, it's a 21-point loss. You just lost to a playoff team. I'm not, Miami can't be too upset. You lost to a playoff team without your starting quarterback.
Yeah.
So
And you were in contention that first half too. It was a ball game still.
yeah, and really, I mean, even in the second half, like they only scored 7 more each quarter. Like it wasn't this wasn't yes, it was a blowout. It was a 21-point loss, but it was a much closer game than the score indicates. And I know that that's one of the phrases I hate in college sports and in sports in general. Oh, it's much closer than it looks on the score. But in this case, I think it was so very true.
Yeah,
I
and
think Miami has a good chance to kind of bounce back and see what happens next week.
absolutely. You kind of look at some of the numbers here. Miami was 1 of 11 on third down, 0 of 2 on fourth. That hurts.
Yeah.
Time of possession was fairly equal, but Miami only had six penalties for 60 yards compared to Cincinnati's 10 for 99. But there was, Cincinnati, once Ben Bryant got hot, there was no slowing him down, getting the ball down the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move into this last one of the day.
Yes.
And and we'll do this one quickly, but because there's not too much to write home about, just full honesty. Toledo versus Ohio State. This is the fourth time these programs have met. The last time it was in Columbus. In fact, all of them have been in Columbus except for 2009, where Toledo was quote unquote the home team in Cleveland.
Yep.
And so Toledo goes in. They have one of the best ranked defenses in the country against scrubs. And I can say this with full honesty. I don't think the Toledo defense by any means is necessarily bad, but I
No.
think that they were just very much untested. When
They
you
were
play long,
untested, and the size. You and I were on the field. We saw
yeah,
the size difference between those guys. Like it's
yeah,
huge. And Toledo though they came out swinging. I mean, don't Toledo and DeQuan Finn. I think DeQuan Finn he exposed Ohio State a lot in their inability to defend against a running quarterback. DeQuan had a great game.
DeQuan
You know,
had a phenomenal game. I
and
mean, you
and
just
Faith
look at
got some awesome pictures of him diving into the end zone,
yeah,
which will be in our website. She was sitting right in front of him
yep.
when that happened. But yeah, DeQuan was great. They were able to come answer Ohio State's first touchdown with a touchdown of their own.
They
It
did
was
it in 4 plays too.
4 plays, yeah, which is incredible. It was to their tight end, I believe it was. Uh,
To
and
to Thomas Zrios.
Israel, yeah, yeah. And so there was up. Toledo made plays. It's not going to show it. Obviously, losing 77-21, but those 21 points were hard earned, and they are. I'm not going to take anything away from Toledo. They played well.
Well, and I think what's interesting, and obviously, as a Toledo guy, you and I were sitting up there in the press box when Ohio State scored first, and I think you mentioned something like, "Okay, it's going to be one of those games," and then Toledo immediately returns it, and you've been in Ohio Stadium how many times, right?
Right.
Have you ever heard the stadium go that quiet that quickly?
Not that quickly, no. I think everyone's kind of like, okay, because I don't think anybody really knew who DeQuan Finn was
No.
and what he was capable of doing because he has weapons around him. There's no denying that he's able to get the ball down the field, and against an Ohio State defensive secondary that's not that great. They have a lot of holes: Denzel Burke and Cam Brown, and they didn't have two of their starters in Tanner McAllister and Josh Proctor, and then Latham Ransom as well. So there's some inconsistencies, if I could say that word, in the defensive backfield, and the Rockets were able to take advantage of it there a few times.
And looking at the numbers on the day as a whole, you can't be upset. Like if you're Toledo, you put up 307 total yards on Ohio State, the number 3 team in the country. 307 yards and 3 scores. Notre Dame didn't have 3 touchdowns. Arkansas State didn't have 3 touchdowns. So I think, and there are no moral victories in college football, especially, and we talked to coaches about that at media day. They, a loss is a loss, and that's on your record. Doesn't matter if it was by 1 point or 100 points. A loss is a loss. So there's no moral victories. And Coach Candle, in his post-game conference, he said something to the effect of, our locker room's hurt right now because we've got so many people who have never been beaten like this, himself included. I mean, he played college football at Mount Union. Who did the beating like this? So it just, Toledo has an opportunity to rebound and to go out to San Diego State this week against Brady Hoke and the Aztecs. So it'll be an interesting one. Ohio State racked up the yardage, 763 yards, 482 through the air, 281 on the ground. All credit to Ohio State for coming out and playing a great game. Ohio State limited their penalties. Toledo did a really good job limiting their penalties too. Only 4 for 23 yards. So it wasn't a penalty laden game. There were no penalties in the first half, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So,
I think that's why that game went by so quick too.
Yeah, that first half just zipped by.
Flew by.
And then the second half, the third quarter felt like it was a century long.
Yeah.
But hats off to Ohio State. Obviously, you defended your home turf on national TV. You had the viewership numbers. I couldn't believe it when you said that to me.
3.9 million.
Insane. I didn't expect that many. For an in-state battle against a team of 5 stars versus a team of 3 stars. Mm-hmm. And that was part of it. CJ Stroud looked every bit the part of the Heisman candidate that he is. Like you said, DeQuan Finn put people on notice, and I saw some of the stuff online on Twitter where people were like, "Oh yeah, what Power 5 school is he transferring to next year?" And it's like, I hope for his sake he stays at Toledo, because none of those guys wanted him before. That he wasn't recruited by him. Like, you go and look at his recruiting stuff. Like, yeah, he was recruited by a lot of G5 programs and low tier Power 5 programs, but he wasn't recruited by the Ohio States or, any of those big schools. And now everybody's like, oh, he would fit well in the SEC. He'd fit. Nah, stay at Toledo. Those schools didn't want you before. Make a name and be a legend where you're at now. That's my opinion. Granted, I'm biased and I want to see our MAC guys succeed, but DeQuan Finn put the country on notice, and people know who he is now.
And it was cool. Speaking of Toledo legends, we got to talk to Bruce Gradikowski and Andrew Hawkins pregame. That was a lot of fun.
Talk about being starstruck.
That was really cool. Hawkins had a podcast with Joe Thomas called the Tomahawk Show. I was a big fan of all Cleveland sports, but I'm a Cleveland guy, so those guys both playing in Cleveland. It was a lot of fun. And, Gradikowski looks great. Hawk looks great. We talked to athletic director Brian Blair for a while. It's kind of whispered into his ear. I go, "That's Hawk and Gradikowski, right?" He goes, all the stars came out for tonight. So it was cool to talk to them a little bit and see them supporting the Rockets in such a huge environment, because they're both Ohio guys. They get it. Well, I guess Gradikowski's from Pittsburgh, but he played in Ohio. He understands what this game meant to Toledo and Ohio State and the state of Ohio itself.
Absolutely. And yeah, because you say Ohio State football, everybody knows the brand. It's a national brand, and Brian Blair's talked about this. He wants to make Toledo a national brand. Toledo's more a regional brand. I think that's a fair thing to say. Like, people in the region know Toledo, but you go up to like Oregon, they don't really know Toledo. He wants to turn Toledo into a national brand, and he mentioned to me as he was walking away after the game had ended, he thanked us for coming out, which I was greatly appreciative of. It's great to have that connection with Brian Blair, but we talked about games like this. It sucks, but that's how you grow. Unless you're willing to test yourself against the best, you can't be the best. And so I think his message is overall pretty positive going out of this game, but it's about responding. The last time Ohio State waxed a MAC opponent, they beat was it Miami, Ohio? Something like 75-5 or something. Or 77-5, something like that.
Then I was at the game in 2016 when they waxed BG like 70 something in
77-10. Yeah. So
yeah,
but both of those teams went on to win the MAC championship that year.
Yep.
So I don't want to say history's repeating itself, but a 56-point loss to Ohio State, who knows,
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's just quick scoreboard on this week's games. I'm just going to go down the list. Toledo taking on San Diego State on Fox Sports 1. Toledo neg 3 out at Snapdragon Stadium in San Diego, California. San Diego coming off 2 consecutive losses. They are 1-2. Toledo going into this game 2-1. How do you feel about this one?
That one's going to be interesting. I think, you talked about no moral victories. I think Toledo has a lot to look into. They have a lot of positives came out of the Ohio State game.
Yeah.
DeQuan Finn can play. He and who's it, Boone, the running back.
Kenny Boone.
I was really impressed with him. You heard his name a lot throughout that game. So I think they have a great combination of talent in that offensive backfield, the quarterback and Boone, along with the receiving core. They have some big receivers and some big tight ends they can get the ball to. I think they have a great shot of winning out west.
I like that. And I was looking at stats on this one. Toledo, even with the schlacking they took last week, still averaging 38 points a game, only surrendering 29 points a game, even after a 77-point blowout. So, I think San Diego State, they're averaging 22 points a game, allowing 27 points a game. Toledo has them in the yardage category, big time. Toledo's almost 400 yards a game, and they still almost put up 300 plus on Ohio State. So they can still move the ball. It doesn't really matter. San Diego State under 300 yards. San Diego State lost a bad one to Utah at Utah, and then they lost to Arizona at home. So I like Toledo in this one, but this one I think it's gonna be a field goal game. Moving on to Kent State versus Georgia. Not much here. Let's call it what it is. On noon on ESPN Plus or SEC Network Plus, Georgia is a 45-point favorite.
Yeah.
I think Kent State show up, take your paycheck, say thank you, fly on out of there. Sean Lewis and what Kent State continues to do by scheduling these games, they're going to be the most battle-tested team in the MAC this year. So hats off to them for that. But
again, this is one of those games where you come out of the stretch, you hope everybody's healthy for a MAC run.
Yeah,
that's one big thing. I think all these coaches, once they get through this non-conference, they're going to look at the roster and be like, all right, is everybody healthy? Who's 85%? And go down the list. And if they can have more 85% guys and up, I think they'll be set for the rest of the year.
I agree with that. So Kent State not expected to win, and I don't expect to see that. I mean, I expect them, if they do what they did against Oklahoma and they keep it close in the first half, if you're Sean Lewis, you can't be upset with that. They held Oklahoma to 7 points in the first half of their game with them. And they were only down 7-3 at halftime. So if you can do something similar to that, defense shows up a little bit, cool. If not a big deal. Moving on, Central Michigan heading over to Beaver Stadium out at University Park, Pennsylvania, taking on the Nittany Lions.
Penn State's playing good ball right now.
Looking real good. They're 3-0. Number 14.
3-0, ranked 14th in the country. Yeah, they are playing really good ball, surprisingly, too. I don't think that they either started off the year ranked in the 20s, I forget, or not at all. Let's see if this says. Yeah, they weren't week one. They weren't ranked versus Purdue, and this is their second MAC opponent this year. They played Ohio week 2, beat them 46-10. They waxed Auburn last week.
Yeah, they
41-12, and then they host the Fighting Jim McElwains this weekend. This will be an interesting one. You look at the numbers here. Penn State's favored by 28 points, which is kind of lower on the lower end, I thought.
I'm not surprised because Central Michigan coming off of a much needed win against Bucknell, and Penn State might be playing a little bit of hangover from that.
There's game. That, and I think too. But you look at Daniel Richardson and Lou Nichols. They kind of thrive in these bigger games. So this is gonna be one of those games where they have nothing to lose, really.
Yeah.
And Coach McElwain, he's coaching the Big Ten. He's coaching the SEC. He knows these environments. So he's had upsets in the past at Oklahoma State and whatnot.
Yeah. So I mean, I
there's
don't
no reason for them not to be able to be competitive in this one.
Well, I mean, shoot, you look at the bowl game. They took on Washington State. Washington State and Central Michigan both lost their bowl game opponent.
2 days notice, yeah.
Yeah, Central Michigan had to pack everything up, drive up to the Sun Bowl or drive out to the Sun Bowl, unpack, play a game 2 days later. I'm sorry, it's so hard to game plan with something like that. And, you and I talked about it, but we can just sit here imagining McElwain pulls out his can of dip, tucks it in his lip and says, all right, boys, let's go do this. And they did.
He
So
throws in a log and says, let's have fun. And they did. That was a great game to watch, too, the Antonio the Tiger Sun Bowl.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, this is a game, too, where they can be extremely competitive or they're going to get blown out. I don't think there's any medium there.
no,
But nevertheless, that'll be a fun one to watch. It's always great to see MACFO on ESPN. That was an ESPN game, right? Or it's on BTN, still on national television, which is huge for the program.
something like that. Yeah. Moving on to Bowling Green, Mississippi State. Bowling Green, dogs by 30. Bowling Green's going to come off that hangover. I don't expect to see a win here. Not saying that they won't be competitive to some point, but they're going back to playing another opponent who is vastly superior to them just in pure talent. Not much to write home about on this one. Mississippi State takes this one. Bowling Green comes back in, prepares for Akron the week after. Not,
Yeah, that's really about all they're at.
yeah,
That's a tough stretch for them. Mississippi State by 30 at this point. Move on to the next game, which we're going to be at.
yeah, man.
Eastern
Eastern.
Buffalo. This is the first time of us going to the factory. I'm excited about that. First time of seeing Eastern and Buffalo play.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited about that. We'll be covering that one. And you kind of look at the numbers there. Eastern Michigan by 6 right now currently. That's a little low, I thought, but I mean, for Buffalo not playing so great and Eastern coming off a huge win, I think that they would have taken Sampson's his last game in Arizona State into those numbers. But nevertheless, at the factory, noon kickoff, we'll be there. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited for this one. Over under is 60 on this. And if we know anything about the MAC, don't count on anything. That's
No.
expect the unexpected.
And
I
that's
do
one
think
thing too. I was talking to a guy on the sidelines at the Horseshoe, telling about our podcast and whatnot, and then we're covering the MAC, and he goes, "Do you know how much money I've lost on MAC?" And I go, "More than you've won." He goes, "Yeah." Welcome to the club.
yeah, seriously. And so I think this one will definitely be an under,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, we say that and then they're going to combine for 108 points. Like that's exactly what's going to happen. Eastern Michigan favored by 6. If I'm a better, I think I'm going to hammer that before that line moves. Cause that's, yeah, I think that is a solid line right there. And that's one Eastern should definitely cover. Moving
Mm-hmm.
on to Ohio, taking on Fordham. Peden Stadium. There's no spread on this one that I see. Fordham's 3-0. Ohio's 1-2, but Ohio's played all FBS opponents.
FBS schools, yeah.
Fordham, they're 3-0 in the FCS. That's great, but I see Ohio taking this one. It's not going to be, I'm looking at all of Fordham's games. They beat Wagner, Monmouth, and Albany, and they beat all of them by 1 score. Like, now you get to play Ohio, and that's fine. That's all well and good, but I think Ohio takes this one. Not much to write home about.
Ohio needs to take this one. They
Ohio,
need it.
yeah. Well, for the sake of the conference, Ohio needs to take this one. Moving on to Akron at Liberty. We talked about this one a little bit. Liberty is 26.5 point favorites. I think Liberty takes it. I'm not that I don't love Akron and not that I don't want to see Joe Moorhead be successful. I just think that this is not a game in which Akron wins. Although DJ Irons has 650 yards on the year. He has no picks.
He's playing really well.
Whereas Kadon Salter for Liberty, 4 touchdowns and 3 picks. So if the Akron defense can show up a little bit and make some noise, this one could get interesting. May not result in an Akron win, but it could get very, very interesting quickly. Moving on to Georgia Southern.
If DJ Irons can play consistently, I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, may not result in a win, but I think it'll be a better game than what the Vegas line is. Ball State, Georgia Southern here. Georgia Southern has quite the I don't want to say it, quite the pre-season or pre-conference wins, I guess. Morgan State 59-7. They beat Nebraska. That's the tail of their season right now.
Yeah.
The win against Nebraska 45-42. And then a peculiar loss to University of Alabama Birmingham. And I don't know. I think this one is one that could go either way. I know Ball State's, supposed to lose by, or they're underdogs by 9.5. If Paddock can get things moving and moving quickly, Carson Steele is a wrecking ball.
Yeah.
And I think that Ball State can keep this one close. I do think Georgia Southern takes it, but I think Ball State keeps this one close.
I think Ball State can win it just because of the momentum coming off this last week. You look at Carson Steele, he played great. John Paddock, I think, is finally getting comfortable behind the offensive line. And the offensive line starting to get comfortable blocking now.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that's going to be, I think, what's the over under here? I didn't look.
The over under is
67.5. That's a lot of points. So I don't know if I'd go. I don't think I'm taking the over on that. But you kind of look at the total yards in the comparison here. The Ball State's averaging 23 points a game. Georgia Southern's 41. But you kind of look. They put up some high numbers against some inferior opponents. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Points allowed 32 to 28 in favor of Georgia Southern. Again, that's still pretty close. Total yards 422. The Cardinals 521 for what's Georgia Southern? The Eagles.
Yes.
Yeah. Either way, so they're fairly competitive in that aspect. But as we get into week 4 here now, I think Coach New knows what he has because he obviously had a quarterback who never started before going into this year in John Paddock. So I think that he knows what he has now. He knows just get the ball to Carson Steele. If you're going to throw the ball, get it to Ja'Shawn Jackson, Hines Tyler.
I mean, if Hines Ward wants to go back to college and play for
exactly,
Ball State,
I'm cool with it. Hines Tyler, and then the Abdul Rahim transfer from Vanderbilt. It has 3 great receivers on the outside. It's just defense needs to stay stout along with the offensive line.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think this one is going to be one of the more interesting games on the day. Ball State keeps it close, could sneak away with a win. I'm expecting a Georgia Southern dub, but anything could happen. So moving on to the first of the last 3, Northern Illinois taking on number 8 Kentucky at Kentucky. I think Northern Illinois, if Rocky Lombardi is back, is a better team than Miami. And Miami played Kentucky pretty tough for the first 3 quarters, or really for the whole game, minus the 2 touchdowns they gave up on the opening kickoff and the subsequent fumble recovery within the first 2 minutes of the third. I do believe that there's a chance Kentucky catches a really good Northern Illinois right now if Rocky's healthy. If Rocky's not healthy, I think this is a fair line. That being said, Kroger Field, great place to watch football. I was there week 1, obviously. Northern Illinois looking to respond. They had Vanderbilt on the ropes. Now you travel into SEC territory. A little bit tougher. I do think Kentucky wins this one, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Northern Illinois make it a game if Rocky Lombardi's there.
Well, we've seen Northern Illinois do this before, too. They went to Georgia Tech last year and won.
Yep.
Nobody expected that.
Nope.
But yeah, it all lies on Rocky Lombardi's health on this game. But again, you were there, you saw it. Kroger Field's a tough place to play, tough place to win. But I think Northern Illinois can their best shot.
Yeah, absolutely. Miami Northwestern, we already talked about this one a little bit. If Miami goes in and beats Northwestern at Ryan Field, this is what's interesting looking at the line. Northwestern's only favored by 7. That's interesting. There's reports coming out that Brett Gabbert may actually be done for the year, which is a brutal loss for Miami. But I kind of, this one's going to be a good one. Miami's got some resilient guys on defense. Northwestern's no powerhouse. They've actually have not looked great this year. They had that win against Nebraska, lost to Duke, and then got beat by Southern Illinois. So they're on a 2-game losing streak right now, and that's not what you want. Miami
they have not won a game in the country yet.
No. Yeah, they're 0-2 in the United States of America. So I think Miami could, they could come in and make some noise at Ryan Field. Excited to see how that one goes. Over under is 49.5. I think it's yeah, you're pointing down. I think you're right with that one. I think it's going to be a low scoring affair. But I think Miami could sneak in and take this one. Pat Fitzgerald. Yeah, Pat Fitzgerald. I like him, and I like what he's done at Northwestern. He's done an impossible job at Northwestern, but I really think Miami and Chuck Martin can go in and say, all right, boys, let's get this done and go get a dub. Last game of the day, our boy, Tim Lester, the Fighting Tim Lesterns of Western Michigan, taking on San Jose State out west at CEFCU Stadium. And San Jose State is a 7-point favorite. Last year, Western and San Jose State played at Western Michigan. And that one was not a close game, I don't think. But yeah, it was 23-3 last year. Western Michigan took care of business. And I think it was in that moment we all thought, wow, this Western team might go win the MAC. And unfortunately, as MACtion does every year, it surprises all of us. San Jose State, -7. I like Western in this one. I really do.
I really do think Western. I saw them live a few weeks ago, and they're good. Seeing how hyped up Slowpeck was after that Ball State game, and talking to Coach Lester, he was really nervous about his quarterback because he never started before.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a ton of confidence in it, especially after the Ball State game. We talked about his toughness and his grit, and he has it. Just putting it all together. This is going to be 2 games since I've spoken to him, and I think they'll be. Being traveling across the country might hurt a little bit. That's for anybody that time change is going to hurt you. I don't know what day they're going out or how long they're going to plan on being out there, but I really think Western can win this one. And
Sure.
San Jose State hasn't had the best luck with MAC schools the past few years.
Yeah, no, I mean it'll be interesting to see. I'm pumped to watch that one. That'll be a late game for us, but I'm excited to see that one. So as we wrap up this week's show, we're going to dive into the mailbag real quick. Got a couple questions here. People asking. We've got the first one here from Group of 5 Focus. Which MAC team traveling to California this week has a better chance of leaving with the W? We've got Toledo taking on San Diego State. We've got Western Michigan taking on San Jose State. I'm going to say both.
If I had to pick one, I'd pick Western.
But I think they're both. Okay.
If I had to pick one, but I really think that both teams have a really good chance of doing it. But then again, you look at San Jose or San Diego State. Brady Hoke has done a phenomenal job with that program since he took back over a couple of years ago.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm with you. I like Western a little bit more than I like Toledo. Toledo's kind of scratching their heads and might be licking their wounds a little bit after the shellacking they just took to Ohio State.
Playing back-to-back road games too is tough.
Yeah.
Even though they only traveled to Columbus, back-to-back road games is not great.
No, not at all. So I think you're probably right. I'm going to pick both. I think both have an equal chance, but I kind of like where you're going with that. I know we had somebody comment on here, College Football Home commented Toledo. So we'll see what happens. From Deep Thought, Ryan CB. I know y'all asked who looked like they'll win the MAC, so I'll ask a slightly different question. Who coming into conference play has looked the best out of conference, or which team do you think will bounce back in conference play that struggled out of conference this year? Oof.
I like Toledo right now.
Yeah, I think Toledo probably has to be my favorite. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm biased, of course, but I think out of conference, they took care of the teams they needed to take care of. And we all expected a loss to Ohio State. I think that was a very, very much what everybody expected. So
yeah. I think Eastern's going to slip in there, though, too.
I was going to say Eastern. I think my new rankings are probably Toledo, Eastern, and Northern Illinois in the MAC West. I think Miami is probably still my favorite in the East, but we can get into that in a minute. But I think it's Toledo, Eastern, and Northern Illinois. So that's been shuffled up a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm right there with you. I like Toledo. Obviously, they took a loss, but they look good taking a loss, if you can say that.
Offensively, they look great taking the loss.
Yeah.
Moving on to Graham Giles. With what we have seen in the first few weeks, including the injury to Gabbert, what's the current hierarchy in the East? That's why I wanted to wait to answer this one. I still think it's Miami. Miami, I think, has the best defense in the East in a conference where defense just doesn't exist. That being said, Kent State's putting up points on people. They put up 20 points on Washington and looked good doing it too. They put up a few on on Oklahoma, and then they absolutely thoroughly throttled Long Island. I still think, kind of when we talk to the group of 5 guys, I think Miami Kent State is the MAC East championship game
Yeah, I think
on
so too.
October 8th.
I really think so too. It's Kent State, they've gone through the grind. And Colin Sheely is getting more comfortable. He's looking better as the games have gone on.
I like Colin Schlee, man. I tell you what, I really like him.
Yeah. He's going through the gauntlet. He'll be the most battle tested quarterback in the conference when conference play starts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Smith out of Miami, Ohio, doesn't look bad.
No, he really doesn't.
Start. He played well against Cincinnati.
Yep.
At least that first half. It was just one of the, if they put a second half together, I think they have a real opportunity to go deep in this season. They contend for a championship in December.
Yeah, absolutely. TNT College Football Podcast. I was at the Pitt Western Michigan game. What do you think Western Michigan needs to do to get the intermediate passing game going? I think Solopek just needs the reps.
Yeah, and that's just gonna come with time with a young quarterback. You look at his receiving core; he has a great receiving core, Cephas and whatnot. They're not Cephas.
Sean Tyler.
Tyler, yep. Tyler's been fairly quiet here the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Overall, but I think Western, once they get their quarterback settled, it's gonna take a few weeks. But I think they have a fantastic opportunity. Sean Tyler on the year rushing is 37 attempts for 189 yards. Corey Crooms is who I was thinking of. My bad. Crooms has 18 receptions for 169 yards. Galloway has 10 receptions for $142, and it kind of drops off after that. But I think they get the intermediate passing game going. Just get those open routes across the middle. They have a great offensive line. I was on the field for Ball State in Western, and the size difference was noticeable.
Yeah,
between Ball State's defensive line and Western's offensive line. So just being able to get Slopak comfortable in the pocket. He can scramble when he needs to. He's not afraid to tuck it and run.
No.
He took some shots. I talked to Coach Lester about that. He goes, he's going to do that, but we just got to make sure he doesn't have to scramble. So it's going to be coming to the offensive line and those receivers, being able to fight off defenders coming across the middle to get those 10, 12-yard receptions.
Sure. And then our last question here from Cat Lady Shearer. What do you think of the dramatic Bachelorette finale? I just commented from the account and I said Alex wasn't selected, so it was a disappointing ending. Well, AJ, you're married, so you couldn't be selected. I was the only eligible one, and I wasn't. So
sure,
I'm disappointed.
I'm heartbroken for you.
I thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. Cool. So that's going to do it for this week, guys. We'll be live tweeting. We'll do some stuff here from Eastern Michigan here this weekend. We're going to meet up with an old friend, Coach Sarah Tisdale, the former Central Michigan lacrosse coach, now converting to her rival school, Eastern Michigan, coaching them in their first year. They have a scrimmage going on at like 2:30 on Saturday. We're going to meet with her for breakfast, chat, and catch up. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I've never met her, so we'll be excited. You, me, and Faith will be up there for another early morning. It'll be fun to get some coffee and hang out. And
won't be as late of a night though that on Saturday.
It won't be. I have to go to a family get together that night in Bellevue, so it won't be too far in my way. But it won't be the getting home at 2:30 in the morning like we did this past weekend, which I'm still not recovered from.
I'm still on the proverbial struggle bus, if you will. I'm just
struggle.
I've been dragging all week.
Yeah, it's been rough.
It's been so fun.
We had to work in our garage on Saturday, so yeah, we have not recovered. But this weekend will not nearly be as bad. The following weekend, I'll be coming to Toledo for homecoming against Central Michigan, and that'll be my last action game of the year.
It'll be your last one of the year, and excited to have you on that. And we can dive into that more next week on next week's show. But yeah, excited for this weekend. Anything else you wanted to let the people at home know?
I'm all set. Talk to them about the pictures. When are you gonna have some stuff online?
We're gonna be trying to get our pictures from last weekend up online sometime before this weekend kicks off. A lot of pictures to filter through, about 1,400 photos that I'm sifting through
between two games. Yeah.
So yeah, between two different games. So we'll be getting those up here shortly. Just working through those. So looking forward to that. We will be posting our pick'em for this week. Our celebrity guest picker for this week is a former guest that we've had, Jared Pugsley, played at Akron and played a few years in the NFL. So excited to have his picks and get him involved. Last week, we had a great time with College Football Home being our guest picker. And looking forward to getting that to you guys this week and our weekend preview. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Continue to follow us on Twitter at College Sport Pod, on Instagram at the CSC Podcast, and we will see you guys next week.
See you.